I would like to welcome you to this study, a four-part study on Jesus among other gods. My hope, of course, is that you would have already read the book, and if you haven't, that you would certainly make that a priority, because I think you will be able to track the ideas much more rigorously with that material already engaged in your thinking. I sincerely desire that this not only be informative to you and inspirational for you, but I hope and pray that it will also be life-transforming. I'll be honest with you, it was that very way in my own life. You see, the challenge of writing this book was very real. We are living in a day where sensitivities are high, where tolerance and pluralism are buzzwords, and there's a lot of important reality we must bear in mind when we are dealing with that kind of a challenge. However, let us be absolutely clear that when we present the nature of truth, as you will soon see, exclusivity is implicit in that claim. How do we approach a subject like this, though? And right from the beginning, I remember two proverbs that I was raised with growing up in India. One of them was this: when you're touching your nose, you can either touch it directly or you can go the long way around. I won't attempt to do that here. But the point being, you can't cut straight into some tough material. Sometimes you just have to go the long way in the challenge of ideas. And the other proverb was what my mother taught me when she once said to me, after you've cut off a person's nose, there's no point giving them a rose to smell. So if you sort of cut an idea down or a person down at his or her knees and then give them the sweet savor of Christ, it's not exactly going to be effective. So what I did was take a look at a half a dozen questions that Jesus answered to those who presented those questions to him. And in the way he answered them, you can see that no other claimant to divine or prophetic status would have ever answered those questions the same way. There is a uniqueness, a marvelous uniqueness. And so in this opening session, we will be looking at one of the questions that was posed to him that I have entitled The Anatomy of Faith and the Quest for Reason. I want to position for you in this first session that I have built upon the chapter called The Anatomy of Faith and the Quest for Reason, 4 principal postulates. The first is in the absolute nature of truth. Second, the tension between faith and reason. Third, what Jesus said about the sign or evidence. And number 4, the uniqueness of his message. So let us begin with this thing called absolutes. We often hear the term relativism. What does relativism really mean? And here you will have to follow very carefully, because I firmly believe that those who espouse that relativism is true live one of the most self-defeating philosophies one can ever hold to. What do I mean by that? Listen carefully now to the statement, all truth is relative. Now repeat that. All truth is relative. Now, if all truth is relative, as soon as you make that assertion, it either includes itself or excludes itself, right? And if it includes itself, that means that statement is not always true either. That statement itself is relative, which means it is making the possibility of absolutes in some instances. Or if it excludes that statement, it is then implying that that particular statement is an absolute while denying absolutes actually exist. You follow what I'm saying? Now, all this may sound very philosophical, but the idea of relativism basically implies that all truth is individually constructed, individually determined, all values are only individually chosen, subjectively appropriated, and so on. But it is truly a self-defeating philosophy. Objective truth is assumed even when it says that all truth is relative. So that is the first thing we need to bear in mind. So as soon as somebody says to you or to me, wait a minute, how can Jesus claim to be the only way to God? How can there be only one way? They are bringing in implicitly an assumption of relativism, but relativism does not hold together and is not coherent as an idea. And ladies and gentlemen, let us not live under the illusion that only the Christian faith claims to be exclusive. The truth of the matter is all major religions in the world at some point lay a claim to exclusivity, so we have to determine whether that claim can be defended or not. And in this book, of course, Jesus Among Other Gods, we trust we have defended the uniqueness and the claim of Jesus Christ to exclusivity. This moves us to the second area of our study, the tension between faith and reason. Bertrand Russell, the famed philosopher, once made the comment when he was asked, "What are you going to say after you die if you were to meet up with God to justify your atheism?" And Bertrand Russell, very glibly, without batting an eyelid, said, "I'll just tell him he did not give me enough evidence." That seems rather audacious, doesn't it? But let's give Russell his due credit here and assume for a moment that he was speaking very candidly, that he actually believed more evidence ought to have been offered. Now, this is where what is smuggled in is fascinating. What is assumed here, follow me now, is that the Christian, in laying claim to a supernatural framework of ultimate reality and the specific revelation of the person of Jesus Christ, quote, lives by faith, and the naturalist who lives only by natural evidence and natural precepts supposedly lives by reason. Is that true? That's certainly what is assumed. Dr. Chandra Vikramasinghe, he's a Sri Lankan by birth, working as Professor of Applied Mathematics at the University of Cardiff in Wales. Now, it is important to notice all of those credentials because he's a practicing Buddhist, and Buddhists are non-theistic. But listen to what Vikramasinghe has to say about naturalism and origins. This is incredible. No matter how large the environment one considers, life cannot have had a random beginning. There are about 2,000 enzymes, and the chance of obtaining them all in a random trial is only 1 part in 10 to the 20th power times 2,000 equals 10 to the 40,000th power, an outrageously small probability that could not be faced even if the whole universe consisted of organic soup. Listen to these words now. If one is not prejudiced either by social beliefs or by a scientific training into the conviction that life originated on the earth, this simple calculation wipes the idea entirely out of court. The enormous information content of even the simplest living systems cannot, in our view, be generated by what are often called natural processes. For life to have originated on the earth, it would be necessary that quite explicit instruction should have been provided for its assembly. Did you look at that statement? He said the possibility of these 2,000 enzymes coming together into the complexity of a living form is 1 in 10 to the 40,000th power. Do you know what that actually means numerically, friends? You know, the whole constitution of the universe, if you were to take all of the galaxies and all of the atoms in the known universe, that is only 10 to the 80th power. Mathematicians will tell you anything in more than 1 in 10 to the 50th power is considered mathematically impossible. This is 10 to the 40,000th That's 1 followed by 40,000 zeros. So minute and so finely tuned in is this universe that he's basically saying you cannot explain it by natural processes. Now, who is using faith? You see, naturalism ends up handcuffed when it has to explain the origin of the universe. That's only one problem for the naturalist when he or she is dealing with the whole area of the tension between faith and reason. There is a second one, and that is the issue of morality. And now I want you to watch another very fascinating statement here. This comes from the 18th century Scottish skeptic David Hume. This is a bit of a tough statement, but watch exactly the magic with words that is implicit in his statement. Take a note of these words. If we take in our hand any volume of divinity or school metaphysics, for instance, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? No. Does it contain any experimental reasoning concerning matter of fact and existence? No. Commit it then to the flames, for it can be nothing but sophistry and illusion. Take note. Don't be afraid of this thought. Here's what he's saying. Take in your hands any book. Take in your hands the Bible, for example. Ask yourself this question. Does it contain any mathematical reasoning? Does it contain any scientific reasoning? If the answer to that is no, toss it then to the flames. It is nothing but sophistry and illusion. The problem with David Hume is that in giving his test for truth, his test fails his own test, because that statement is neither mathematical nor experimental. You know, friend, what happens here? When you look at origin and morality, it becomes very obvious very quickly who is the one who has to live by faith. So, here's the third question. What does Jesus say about a sign? And in Matthew chapter 12, he has this most fascinating statement. A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a miraculous sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will stand up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah. Now one greater than Jonah is here. The queen of the south will rise at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for she came from the ends of the earth to listen to Solomon's wisdom. And now one greater than Solomon is here. Listen carefully to what Jesus is saying here. He makes it clear that he is not completely against a sign, because there were times where he gave very specific signs. But I'll tell you what he does tell us, that he brings together both the weight of a sign with the respect that the sign alone will never ever convince a mind that is determined to reject the implications. What does Jesus say about a sign or about evidence? And I think you'll find this fascinating, because in the end you will find out Jesus' response to Bertrand Russell would be something like this. Mr. Russell, your problem is not the absence of evidence. Your problem is the suppression of evidence. God has put enough into this world to make faith in him a most reasonable thing. He has only left enough out to make it impossible to live by sheer naked reason alone. So now's where we zero in on what Jesus meant when he talked about a sign and when he talked about the message. Take a look, for example, at the words at Hebrews chapter 11. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Being sure of what we hope for and being certain of what we do not see. And so this takes me to the final thought, the very uniqueness of his message. You see, the whole dialogue began in John chapter 2, when Jesus walked into the temple in Jerusalem there and overthrew all of the tables of the money changers and those peddling in paraphernalia, exploiting the spiritual hunger of people. And as he walked in so boldly, the power structure was well entrenched, and all the commercialism of religion was very much in place. And he walked, imagine the sight. He walks straight into this setting, overturns the tables, and he looks them in the eye and says, "Get these out of here. You have made my Father's house, which is a house of prayer, into a hangout for crooks and thieves." A lot of courage, an awful lot of courage. And this event was going to follow him all the way to the cross. And they looked at him and said, "With what authority do you do all of this?" And that's where his answer comes in his message, blending the power of the message and the evidence. He says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." They looked at him and said, "What? It took 46 years to build this, and you're going to rebuild it in 3 days?" And the Bible says this marvelous comment: they did not know that he was speaking about the temple of his body. Here's the uniqueness of the message right off the bat, ladies and gentlemen. Jesus' message is just filled with splendor because he gives this body a place that no other claimant to divine or prophetic status would ever have given. Take a look at any pantheistic worldview, take a look at any naturalistic worldview, and you will see a world of difference. The pantheist goes to the temple to worship, be it Hindu or Muslim. The Christian does not go to the temple. The Christian takes the temple with him or her. This becomes the dwelling place of God himself. Listen, for example, to the words of Deepak Chopra here. You will find it most fascinating. Deepak Chopra, the guru of blending naturalism with pantheism. Here's what he says about the physical body. On the material level, both you and a tree are made up of the same recycled elements, mostly carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and other elements in minute amounts. You could buy these elements in a hardware store for a couple of dollars. The real difference between the two of you is in the energy and in the information. Your body is not separate from the body of the universe because at quantum mechanical levels there are no well-defined edges. You are like a wiggle, a wave, a fluctuation, a convulsion, a whirlpool, a localized disturbance in the larger quantum field. The larger quantum field, the universe, is your extended body. Now, isn't that wonderful? Or a wiggle, a worm, a localized disturbance. That's complimenting, isn't it? You, a localized disturbance in this larger quantum field. Assuming, of course, these very words have come to us from another wiggle, worm, and a localized disturbance. Where does this kind of thinking come from? Contrast this with what Jesus did. When the woman walked in to pour the ointment on him, she was a harlot. She'd made all that money probably through ill means, and now encountering the Lord of mercy and forgiveness, she comes in and pours that ointment. She was not a localized disturbance, a wiggle, a worm, some kind of quantum fluctuation. He told the people observing what she was doing. And he also went on to tell us wherever the gospel was going to be preached, there should this story also be told. You see, he transformed a place of pure natural pleasure and irreverence into the temple of the living God. So I want to leave with you this one concluding thought. As you look at this whole area of the absolute nature of truth, the tension between faith and reason, what Jesus said about a sign and the uniqueness of his message, think about this question. Do you think more people reject him because of the struggles of the mind, or is because of the unwillingness to bring the body into the place that God intended it to be? That may answer some issues of the anatomy of faith and the quest for reason. If you recall, we ended our first session on the note of the sanctity of the body, how Jesus referred to the body as the temple of the living God, and places that very unique truth for your consideration and mine. Now we come to, I think, one of the most challenging and profound passages of Scripture that you will ever encounter. And this presents a second question to him that I raised in our study, Jesus Among Other Gods. I'd like to read several verses for you from the 6th chapter of John's Gospel, beginning from verse 53. But the context is on the heels of a couple of miracles, the feeding of the 5,000, and Jesus is walking on water and so on. But the crowd went looking for him. And it is again fascinating how they come to him and what they challenge him with. They look to him and they say something to this effect, that look, when Moses was around, he gave the people manna in their wilderness wanderings. What sign are you going to give us? What kind of bread are you going to give to us that we won't hunger and have all of our physical needs met? The surprising answer Jesus gave to them was something that caught them completely off guard. Jesus said to them, I tell you the truth, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up at the last day. For my flesh is real food, and my blood is real drink. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in him. Just as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so the one who feeds on me will live because of me. This is the bread that came down from heaven. Your forefathers ate manna and died, but he who feeds on this bread will live forever. He said this while teaching in the synagogue in Capernaum. On hearing it, many of his disciples said, This is a hard teaching. Here's the question now. Who can accept it? Aware that his disciples were grumbling about this, Jesus said to them, Does this offend you? What if you see the Son of Man ascend to where he was before? The Spirit gives life. The flesh counts for nothing. The words I have spoken to you are spirit, and they are life. Yet there are some of you who do not believe. Let's admit it. When you first read those words, you say, what does this really mean? What is Jesus saying to us? And friends, what I believe we must do is come to grips with this, because herein lies an answer that I think meets one of the deepest longings of the human heart. It was D.H. Lawrence who once made the comment that we often think in life's hungers we are looking for love, that if we find an all-encompassing love of some sort, it would alleviate any sense of loneliness and alienation and be the sum and substance of all of our answers. But Lawrence went on to say, he said, I do not believe that is the ultimate longing. He said there is something more than love that we long for. I believe D.H. Lawrence is right. The first thing I believe Jesus does is to enable us to understand our hungers. He enables us to understand our hungers. This theme of hunger is not uncommon with Jesus. You remember how he talked to the woman at the well, and when she came to draw water, he talked to her about giving her the drink of water so that she would never thirst again. And on many occasions he refers to this motif of food that he has to offer that is not like the food we talk about. In fact, when he was talking to the woman about giving her a drink so that she would never thirst again, remember the disciples had gone into town to buy lunch, and when they came back and they said to him, aren't you hungry? And he said to them, I have food to eat that you know nothing of. And then continuing the hunger motif and the food motif, he said, lift your eyes and look at the fields. They are already ripe unto harvest. So let me pause for a moment here and ask you to think deeply on this particular matter, the variety of hungers with which you and I live. There is the hunger for physical food. You see the lack of it in many parts of the world. You can walk through the streets of some countries that are particularly deprived in this area, at least in terms of distribution, and you can see what it means to be starved. And yet, ironically, even in countries where we are not starved, where we have plenty of food, there is still that hunger that comes cyclically every day, whether it's breakfast time, lunchtime, tea time, or dinner time, or whatever, that yearning for a morsel of food. But that's not the only hunger with which we live. There is the hunger for knowledge. Our libraries are crammed full of books and reading and listening and pursuing ideas, philosophy, theology, all the disciplines that occupy our thinking. So there's the hunger for knowledge. There's also the hunger for entertainment. We long to laugh hilariously, and I trust legitimately. There is the hunger for companionship, the hunger for intimacy. All these hungers abound, not the least of which, and may I suggest to you, the paramount of which is indeed spiritual hunger. We are close to a very profound truth, my dear friend. Need I even expand upon this? The hunger for some kind of contact with God. The world over, our temples are full. Our mosques are full. Places of worship find men, women, young people, children coming within its walls. All kinds of expressions are revealed in an effort to somehow satisfy this hunger. And what Jesus does here is extraordinary. First, having identified the hunger, now he tells us what is the provision that he makes for that hunger. He makes the comment, I am the bread of life, and goes out to point out that his body was broken, his blood was shed, and that he intended this to be a provision for the spiritual hunger with which you and I live. You know, friends, food is a wonderful thing. We think of food as nourishment. We think of food for delight and pleasure. We think of food for celebration. We think of food for fellowship. All these things surround the intake of a delicious meal. And in the Middle East, where I have been many times, food is indeed that kind of experience that you enjoy together, bringing pleasure, nourishment, fellowship, and all of that together. Jesus added something very fascinating here. He added that element of commitment. There was a commitment that he was bringing in this moment where he was talking about a broken piece of bread and a cup that he was going to share with those who followed him, and as he shared with his disciples in those early days. When I was in Jordan many years ago, they have a treat for special guests called the mensef, where rice is piled upon a tray with terrific succulent pieces of lamb and pine nuts and all kinds of delicacies with some gravy poured into it. And the wonderful thing is, as it is like a mound on a tray, friends stand around, you roll up your sleeves, and you eat with your hands. You're making contact with the food, and it is symbolic of friendship, warmth, that all barriers are broken. It is a marvelous experience to have in an Arabic household. What I think Jesus is going to talk about here is an expansion of that in greater theological depth, because his broken body and his shed blood sort of were going to be that mensef of God. Hear me. You see, your problem and mine is that we are broken people. We are broken away from God. We are broken away from one another. We are even broken from ourselves. Life is disconnected. See it all around us, not just in war and the rumors of wars, but see it in the statistics of our broken homes and lives and dreams and families and relationships, and then ultimately people broken within themselves. When Jesus gave that piece of bread and that cup, he was going to mend that brokenness within us. He was not talking about his literal flesh and blood. He says the words that he talked about were spirit, and theologians tell us how there was a real presence without a literal presence of Christ himself in this thing we call communion. But when we partake of that, he gives us the insight of what it means to be whole, and we relive life the way it was intended to be lived out. Here's what we now must understand about the uniqueness of the Christian message. What Jesus is talking about is communion with God. Take the weight of those words. Communion with God. You see, in Hinduism, for example, the goal is not communion, the goal is union with the divine. That is why they meditate. There is no I, you in pantheism. There is only one capital I. But the spirit hungers, and that's why you will see religious manifestations in these religious worldviews, even though they are monistic, one reality, pantheistic. You are identical with the divine, but the heart longs for something other than that, and communion is sought. So while the Hindu talks about pursuit, he basically talks about getting absorbed and understanding one's own divinity. Listen, for example, to the words of Deepak Chopra. In reality, we are divinity in disguise, and the gods and goddesses in embryo that are contained within us seek to be fully materialized. True success is therefore the experience of the miraculous. It is the unfolding of the divinity within us. Can you believe that? The unfolding of the divinity within us. Take a look at this world. Is that what you see? Divinity within human beings? With all of our depravity? One Hindu mystic talked about this as man is God in a temporary state of self-forgetfulness. My word, it is utterly contradictory and contrary to the experience of reality. But while the Hindu world goes for this hunger of union with the divine, the Muslim world, God is so distant, he is so far, and will ever remain in that huge chasm. So while for one the gap is uncrossable, for the other the gap is so erased that there is a unity established. In the Christian faith, it is neither totality of distance, nor is it an absorption into the infinite divine. It is communion, an intimacy that we can have with the living God. Ladies and gentlemen, when you break bread next time, come to the realization that what that symbolizes in the touch, in the taste, in the thinking, in the volition, in the community, two things are expressed. Number one, your individuality is affirmed, but your individuality in community is also established. You see, the disciples and the masses came looking for a piece of bread so that they would never hunger again. Jesus said to them, "The food I give to you is not the bread that you are looking for. This is the greater bread that your spirits are longing for." For you see, he said it so clearly. I am the bread. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. Jesus Christ is identical with his message. If you go to Muhammad, he is different from his teaching. If you go to Krishna or Zarathustra, they are different from their teaching. You come to Christ, he is identical with his teaching. Physical bread, yes, it's temporary. Christ, the living bread, who offers himself to bring together the brokenness and mend us, giving us sight to add to our insight, that we can transcend the mere materiality of life and be fulfilled in the Spirit. May that be our experience as you think of what it means to really commune with the living God. Welcome back to our study of Jesus among other gods. So far we have looked at two major questions, and if you remember how we ended those first two sessions, it'll help us to move on to this third one. In the first one, the anatomy of faith and the quest for reason, we ended up dealing with the whole issue of the tension between faith and reason, the place of the mind and the body, and how often the passions of the body get in the way. In the last session, while we were dealing with a taste for the soul, we came upon that extraordinary text where Jesus referred to his own sacrifice as his broken body and the shed blood that was given for our own well-being, how he brought our lives back together. Interestingly enough, as we move to this third session, we ask the toughest question of all. The question, is God the source of my suffering? Follow the words from the Gospel of John in the 9th chapter. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And then he goes on towards that closing passage to say these words to his questioners. If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. This is another one of those intriguing conversations, isn't it? I do not doubt that the question raised by the disciples sort of echoed the question of the ages, whether a person is a skeptic, a pantheist, a theist, an agnostic, whatever ism or schism we represent. The question haunts. If God indeed is who he claims to be and we are essentially spiritual beings, why do we see this kind of evil and suffering? Jesus uses this extraordinary miracle, a little more than just a metaphor, to explain something of a larger reality in life itself. So let's just pursue this in one or two ways. Let's look at the skeptic, for example. I mean, the philosopher has raised this very daunting question for centuries. And the question basically boils down to this. Because there is evil in this world, therefore there cannot be an all-powerful God. Some of you may have heard me use this illustration, but I think it's pertinent for me to repeat it for you so that you can see the light touch of the humor in it also. I recall being at the University of Nottingham many years ago when a student shot up out of his seat and said to me this: there cannot be an all-powerful, all-loving God because of the presence of evil, gratuitous evil, and so on. And I said to him, when you say there's such a thing as evil, aren't you assuming there's such a thing as good? He granted that. I said, when you say there's such a thing as good, aren't you assuming there's such a thing as a moral law on the basis of which to differentiate between good and evil? And he finally had to grant that too, that there had to be a point of reference, an absolute that could sustain something as either morally good or morally evil. He said, yes, I grant you that. So when there's such a thing as evil, you assume there's such a thing as good. When you assume there's such a thing as good, you're assuming there's such a thing as a moral law on the basis of which to differentiate between good and evil. I said, but sir, if you assume there's such a thing as a moral law, must you not posit a being, a source of the moral law, a person in whom this moral law is contained? But that's whom you're trying to disprove and not prove. Because if there is no moral lawgiver, there is no moral law. If there is no moral law, there is no good. If there is no good, there is no evil. What is your question? And I'll never forget, he sort of looked rather puzzled by it all and said, what then am I asking you? Now, light-hearted as it sounded, there was nevertheless the reality of the question. So here's the first challenge, and I want you to hear me very carefully. When the skeptic invokes the presence of evil as a reality with which to disprove the existence of God, that skeptic is actually living in contradiction. because unless this is a moral universe, there cannot be a moral reality. And the only way to posit a moral universe is if there is a moral being as its first cause. So when the skeptic talks about the presence of evil, unwittingly he or she actually smuggles in the presence of God. So they live with contradiction, which then moves them to a second option. And that is what they try to say is that, well, we do have these moral ideas that have come into our thinking by way of evolutionary processes and so on. Richard Dawkins, the noted atheist from Oxford, made this extraordinary comment. I want you to observe these words very carefully again. In a universe of blind physical force and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at the bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, and no other good. Nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. Can you imagine trying to tell a woman who's been raped that the rapist was merely dancing to his DNA? Tell a father or mother whose little boy has just been run over by a car that the drunken driver was just dancing to his DNA? You see, these are existentially unsustainable, to say nothing about the rationally unsustainable escape routes. So what happens is that because there is no context for morality, contradiction is just sucked into this vacuous argument. Now, there's one other way, of course, they try to deal with this, and I've dealt with it in my book, the idea that could not God have created us as beings who would only choose good and not even have the possibility of choosing evil? Could we not have a goodness that is constant and sustained and uninterrupted? And the answer to that is that you're asking for the ultimate ethic of love while saying the person has no choice in the process. Can you really sustain a choice of love if the person had no other option but to mechanistically yield to the choice that was made or that had been made? This can get quite intricate, and I just urge you to study the material in the book, but the skeptic is sort of barred from any escape routes here. This then brings us to the pantheist. Here we deal with Buddhism and Hinduism specifically. And when you're talking to the Hindu about evil and suffering and pain and so on, he or she will use words like Maya, dukkha, in the Buddhist jargon. Dukkha meaning suffering and pain, and Maya meaning transitory or illusionary. But there's an interesting twist that the Hindu or Buddhist give to it. While the Hindu says that all that appears around you is only transitory or impermanent, you move ultimately to what is permanent and the essential ultimate reality of oneself. Buddhism reverses that and says, while all that appears around us is actually permanent, what you have to do is shed that appearance and move towards an ultimate impermanence. You move from the appearance of permanence to the reality of impermanence, according to the Buddhists. You move from the appearance of impermanence to the reality of permanence in the Hindu setting. If you can fathom that, you begin to at least get the bottom line of them struggling with what is real and what is merely a transitory appearance in our lives. If you read the Hindu scriptures, for example, you will see how they draw the analogy that we are like actors on a stage, and while evil and killing and shedding of blood and all may go on, backstage we are all really friends. And this world is sort of a theater. and you just do your lines and play your part. When the curtain is drawn and the play is over, you'll find the permanence of one ultimate reality behind it all. Many of the Hindu scriptures actually deal with this, but the sense of Maya and illusion is very real in Eastern philosophy. What common ground do the Hindu and Buddhist then have? If they disagree on what is permanent and what is transitory, what is the common ground they do have? And here something fascinating emerges. The common ground they do have is that of reincarnation. Buddha's opening lines, every birth is a rebirth and every birth is a payment for the previous life. The Hindu will call it karma and karam, and the Buddhist will call it kama in the Pali language. There's a difference in the pronunciation of the word. But if you can now come to grips with this, that reincarnation and karma are very much the heart and core of both Hinduism and Buddhism, now you begin to see the distinction that emerges in the Christian life. May I therefore deal with this question? What about the issue posed by the disciples? Did they believe in reincarnation? Why was this man born blind? Did he sin or his parents sin? The fact of the matter is, that is not the question that is giving us the answer to reincarnation. That is a question in and of itself. If anything, Jesus immediately dismisses the possibility of another life in which to make amends for it, because he says the night comes when no man can work. He goes on to explain that there is a time given to each life in which we make the choice, and at the end of that life is that eternity and destiny. I will give you scriptures to sustain that, but let me unpack the philosophical problems within the pantheistic framework. For example, if every birth is a rebirth, what was the person paying for in their first birth? Was there a beginning? Or is there a continuous cyclicality with no beginning? Is that a rationally, existentially feasible concept? William Lane Craig, the Christian philosopher, says to talk about this eternal cyclicality and so on, he says it's like trying to jump out of a bottomless pit. Where do you get started? So what was happening in the first birth? What life was being paid for? Here, for example, are the words of the Hindu holy scriptures, the Upanishads. Listen to what one of those scriptures has to say about reincarnation. Accordingly, those who are of pleasant conduct here, the prospect is indeed that they will enter a pleasant womb, either the womb of a Brahman, the priestly caste, or the womb of a Kshatriya, the warrior or royal class, or the womb of a Vaishya, the working or professional class. But those who are of stinking conduct here, these are not my words, these are theirs. The prospect is indeed that they will enter a stinking womb of a dog, or the womb of a swine, or the womb of an outcast. Do you notice the caste system emerging here now all of a sudden? The hierarchy of the priestly, the working, the outcast. That, by the way, is one of the reasons Buddha rejected Hinduism, because he dispensed with the caste system. He could not accept it. But here it is. All of life, be it animal, human, vegetable, and every form of life then is in a sense the paying for a previous life of wrongdoing. Does this mean that Buddha at one stage was a sinner? Paying for a previous life? Went through all these reincarnations till he could lead a perfect life in order to earn nirvana? For what? For the extinguishing of the concept of self? My dear Christian friend, or if you are not a follower of Christ, pay heed to these questions. Listen carefully. There are many passages of Scripture where Jesus clearly tells us we have one life that is given to us. In John chapter 11, for example, the story of Lazarus and the rich man. One lived a life acceptable to God, the other lived a life unacceptable. Both were in their destiny. at the point of Jesus' reference to those two lives. There was no reincarnation here. There was a culmination and a judgment that confronted them. Jesus makes this very, very clear time and time again. And in the book of Hebrews, for example, we see it is appointed unto man once to die, and after that the judgment. When you come upon the passage of the thief on the cross in Luke chapter 23, you see the same thing. When he says, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. The thief had obviously led a pretty rotten life. But now as he made his life right with God and asked for mercy and forgiveness, Jesus says to him, today you will be with me in paradise. There's an extraordinary concept here which we'll touch upon in the final session. But here it is. There's a life that is lived, a culminating moment, and then that time spent in eternity either with God or separated from God. There is no reincarnational motif in the Christian scriptures. Let me now hasten through them, what it is that the Bible really says about the problem of suffering and evil. I want to give you 6 thoughts. I won't be able to go through them. You will have to study it in the book as I've given it to you and match it against the scriptures. Number 1, God is the author of life. Number 2, there is a script to that life if God is the author. Number 3, that in that script the ultimate purpose is not goodness or badness, but the ultimate purpose is worship, either in awe and surrender to the living God, or worship of self and other manifestations of desires which separates us from God. So number 1, God is the author. Number 2, there is a script. Number 3, there is a purpose for that script. Number 4, that there is a moral justification given to us by God of why evil actually exists. Number 5, that the ultimate struggle with evil is within and not externally. And number 6, evil may not be the most difficult question of all. There may be something greater. You can trace these arguments as I have given them to you in Jesus among other gods. May I, as I attempt to tie this together, give you some summary statements. God has a purpose for your life and mine. And that purpose is born out of a God who is not merely good, but out of a God who is holy. Holiness goes beyond goodness. Ladies and gentlemen, God did not come to make bad people good. He came to make dead people live. And that death that we have is because of our rejection of God. And Christ comes to tell us He makes us alive again, alive to God. So it is not goodness or badness, it is life or death that we have to deal with in the eyes of God Himself. But then the purpose is worship. Worship is what binds together all of the various propensities of the human heart and brings it into a composite expression of what life is intended to be. But how do we come to this life of worship? Here is the cardinal expression that comes to us from the gospel. At the centerpiece of the gospel of Jesus Christ is a cross. There is no cross anywhere else. Not in skepticism, not in pantheism, not even in the deistic extension of how God intervenes in history. As you and I take a good look at the cross, two realities converge in the cross: ultimate goodness and ultimate evil. May I repeat that? Ultimate goodness, the grace and the mercy of God. Ultimate evil, where humanity rejected this goodness and put the Lord Jesus Christ on 2 pieces of timber. Here's the point I want you to understand. Evil is to life what contradiction is to reason. When an argument is contradictory, the argument breaks down. When evil enters life, life breaks down. Suffering is the tip of evil, the poisoned arrow that brings pain to us. It is evil that is the cause. Now, evil can harden and make you and me calloused. Goodness is ever fresh and is perpetually enchanting. In the cross, we see not just evil, otherwise you would have become calloused over a period of time. we see the wonder of goodness that tenderizes the heart to enable us to understand both evil and goodness. As you trace through the argument in the book, you'll see philosophical aspect, the existential aspect, and finally the spiritual aspect. You see, ladies and gentlemen, the problem of evil and pain is not outside, it is within. And only when we understand what evil is can we understand what suffering is. It is the result of being separated from God Himself. Which means we begin by changing the way we see ultimate reality. And that sight can only come by the miracle intervention of God who transforms your heart. You see, at the end He said to His questioners, "Had you people known you were blind yourselves, I could have helped you to see. But because you think you can actually see, you are really the blind ones." And this man, who now has got the miracle of sight, has a greater miracle than physical sight. His heart has been transformed. He has seen me, the Christ, the Son of the living God. May our eyes be opened together to see Him who is the author of life and who sustains us in the midst of pain. God bless you. We come now to the final session, and this one, of course, is titled in the book as a final chapter, "Is There a Gardener?" Let me read one verse for you from the Scriptures in the 20th chapter of John's Gospel, and as we bring it to an end, I will put it in a larger context, but for now, just these very plain words, where Mary is looking for Jesus' body in the tomb. And she hears this voice behind her saying, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" And within that question, I think, is wrapped up an enormous amount of human pursuit and God's mercy and provision. It'll be impossible to fathom the depths of what is going on in that very plain question that is laden with an awful lot of meaning. In the last chapter, Is There a Gardener?, I begin with those two parables. One is given to us by the naturalist philosophers Anthony Flew and John Wisdom, and the other one is a response by Christian philosopher John Frame. Track these words carefully now as Flew and Wisdom present this challenge to the Christian believer. Once upon a time, two explorers came upon a clearing in the jungle. In the clearing, growing side by side, were many flowers and many weeds. One of the explorers exclaimed, "Some gardener must tend this plot." So they pitched their tents and set a watch. But though they waited several days, no gardener was seen. "Perhaps he is an invisible gardener," they thought. So they set up a barbed wire fence and connected it to electricity. They even patrolled the garden with bloodhounds, for they remembered that H.G. Wells's Invisible Man could be both smelt and touched, though he could not be seen. But no sounds ever suggested that someone had received an electric shock. No movements of the wire ever betrayed an invisible climber. The bloodhounds never alerted them to the presence of any other in the garden than themselves. Yet still the believer between them was convinced that there was indeed a gardener. There must be a gardener, invisible, intangible, insensible to electric shocks, a gardener who has no scent and makes no sound, a gardener who comes secretly to look after the garden which he loves. At last the skeptical explorer despaired. but what remains of your original assertion? Just how does what you call an invisible, intangible, eternally elusive gardener differ from an imaginary gardener, or even from no gardener at all? A point well taken. If the world were represented as a garden, and there was a skeptic and a, quote, believer trying to argue with each other whether a gardener actually tended the plot, this is the way the parable would read. John Frame counters with, I think, an equally brilliant parable. Follow the words here. Once upon a time, 2 explorers came upon a clearing in the jungle. A man was there pulling weeds, applying fertilizer, and trimming branches. The man turned to the explorers and introduced himself as the royal gardener. One explorer shook his hand and exchanged pleasantries. The other ignored the gardener and turned away. There can be no gardener in this part of the jungle, he said. This must be some trick. Someone is trying to discredit our secret findings. They pitched camp, and every day the gardener arrived to tend the garden. Soon it was bursting with perfectly arranged blooms. But the skeptical explorer insisted he's only doing it because we're here, to fool us into thinking that this is a royal garden. One day the gardener took them to the royal palace and introduced the explorers to a score of officials who verified the gardener's status. Then the skeptic tried a last resort. Our senses are deceiving us. There is no gardener, no blooms, no palace, and no officials. It's all a hoax. Finally, the believing explorer despaired. But what remains of your original assertion? Just how does this mirage differ from a real gardener? There's the question. To the one who says, how does this invisible, intangible, eternally elusive gardener differ from no gardener at all? And the counter perspective is, how does this mirage you're talking about differ from a real gardener? You see, the Bible tells us that in this context, the gardener did arrive and was seen. Frankly, I like these horticultural terms, although I must confess I'm not a gardener at all, and if my wife were listening, there'd be a loud amen in the background. So my last thoughts to you are framed precisely within that, the story of the gospel in 4 gardens to see the difference and the uniqueness that Jesus Christ presents to us. Let's go to the first garden. In the beginning, God. God created the heavens and the earth. And you begin to see the Garden of Eden represented so magnificently. And as we are told of God being the creator and the designer of this beautiful garden setting, we immediately run into the conflicts that we have now faced over several millennia. You see, we get bogged down in the wrong question. For all these decades, we have spent our time arguing, was it in X number of days? Did he create it in 6 days? Or is this universe 15 billion years old, as the naturalist asserts, who tries to bring about a plain naturalistic explanation? Now, I am not suggesting to you for a moment that those issues are not important, whether it is a literal 6-day or otherwise. That is not unimportant. But may I say to you, it is not of primary importance, and may I sustain that. Here is the reality that both have to face. Let me give you an illustration. Dean Overman, in one of his magnificent books dealing with the issue of design or accident, makes this assertion and sustains it in many other ways. Think about this. If you were to take 1 million monkeys, and each monkey given 1 typewriter, and each monkey pounded 1 letter per second. So you've got 1 million monkeys, 1 million typewriters, each monkey pounding away at 1 letter per second, and took about 379 letters out of one of Shakespeare's quotations and presented it to the monkeys for them to start typing away. Do you know how long it would take for the monkeys typing to come about with all the possibilities that would include the possibility of these 379 letters in sequence. And I'm not talking about the spaces and the punctuation marks and all of them. It would take 1,000,000 billion years for 379 letters to come in sequence in the possibilities. 1,000,000 billion years. If those monkeys were given the time by which this universe is measured now by the naturalist, 15 billion years, do you know there's not even enough time in this 15 billion year universe to put those 379 letters together in their possibilities? There are 3.1 billion biological letters in the human DNA. 15 billion years enough to pull this all together when 379 letters would take 1,000,000 billion years in random attempts? Even the strongest naturalist has conceded one point. There just isn't enough time to explain this universe. So you see, the question is really not 6 days or 15 billion years. The question is, do either of them afford the possibility without something supernatural or the miraculous? Well, ladies and gentlemen, has he also spoken to us in other language than just design of this universe? And that was the question in the garden. Did God really say? Has he given to us his mind on what life is all about? Let me give you these pointed statements. When you turn to the book of Genesis, you see these four realities clearly scripted for us. First, that there is a creator, that humanity is created as both a personal and eternal being. Second, that there is purpose, an intelligent, spiritual being. Thirdly, we are not alone. We are relational and dependent beings. Fourthly, we are moral entities, accountable and rational beings. If you just take these four components, you begin to see that it is worldviews apart from both the skeptic and or the pantheist, and in many ways even the theist that comes from other frameworks. The Bible says to us, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. I think it is John purposefully saying, in the beginning was the Word. There was language, there was purpose, there was design, there was meaning. So the first garden is the garden of the text. He has spoken. But there is a second garden. That second garden is the garden of the context. It is written, it is written, it is written. Here is something very unique, again, in the Christian faith. There is a context given by which we determine right and wrong. These are not ad hoc decisions we make, not pragmatic solutions. There's a bigger context that addresses the particular choices.
Welcome with me, Dr. Ravi and Zacharias.
I remember being at a University Open Forum and one of the leading networks sent a producer to come and tape this proceedings of the University Open Forum. But she was only going to stay 10 minutes, she said, because that's all the news network wanted of this. I said, that's fine. She ended up staying the whole 3 hours plus because she was fascinated by the goings-on there. At the end of it, she was very irenic, very conciliatory, very warm and friendly. And as we were walking away, she says, Ravi, can I ask you a personal question off the cuff? This is not for the interview, just off the cuff. I said, you promised me this off the cuff? She said, yes. She said, I'm bothered by Christianity for many reasons. One of them is this: you all are very inconsistent. You speak against racial discrimination. You speak against racism. Why then do you speak against the homosexual? I said, now wait a minute, let's put this in context now. Let's differentiate between the individual you're talking about and the practice, because the individual merits our love, our efforts to reach out to them, whatever their lifestyle. Jesus was with people of varied lifestyles. I said, but if you're asking us why we are against the practice of it, then here is what I say to you. Race is sacred. You do not violate a person's race. Sexuality is sacred. You do not violate the sanctity of sex in any form whatsoever. You've just used one illustration. So you see, there's a sacredness in race, there's a sacredness in sexuality, so our response is based upon the common thread that runs through both. You have to explain to me why you treat one as sacred and desacralize the other. She was quiet and she said, I'd never ever thought of it in those terms. There is a continuity to the way we view life that carries over in the applications. There is a reason why the Christian makes these decisions. There is a moral framework within which we live, and we are given a context. So as we zero in on the truth here, bear in mind, we have a text. God has spoken. We have a context. We are moral, spiritual beings. Now we come to the contest in the Garden of Gethsemane. I don't know if any one of you has ever been there. Take a little glimpse of it, as we had one recently in our visit. All of the gospel writers place Jesus in this very setting during these moments of his anguish, his loneliness, his pain, when the disciples really could not even keep watch while he was going through that intense moment of struggle with the cross just looming before him. And when we look at this garden, we are looking now at the contest. We looked at the text, we looked at the context, and now we are looking at the contest. Because this is where we approach what I believe is the single most magnificent truth of Christ prior to the resurrection. And I believe if we understand the cross in its full import, we will be able to understand what sets the message of the gospel apart so differently. It was the Apostle Paul who said to the church at Corinth that I desire to know nothing amongst you save Jesus Christ and him crucified. He also went on to say, we preach Christ crucified, the wisdom of God and the power of God. But friends, the more I think of the cross in the light of what the Bible intends for us to understand, the more I realize how far we have come from the heart of the gospel. Listen, for example, to the words of theologian Martin Hengel. Jesus did not die a gentle death like Socrates with his cup of hemlock, much less passing on old and full of years like the patriarchs of the Old Testament. Rather, he died like a slave or a common criminal in torment on the tree of shame. Jesus did not die just any death. He was given up for us all on the cross in a cruel and a contemptible way. Reflection on the harsh reality of crucifixion. Please hear these words now. Reflection on the harsh reality of crucifixion in antiquity may help us overcome the acute loss of reality which is to be found so often in present theology and preaching. The acute loss of reality. That, I believe, captures for me this counter perspective of Jesus Christ, because it is the cross that defines reality for us, particularly the pain, the isolation, the fragmentation, the loneliness, and the brokenness. But friends, I want us to understand something. Jesus did not just die a martyr's death for some worthy cause, nor did he die sort of as a quiet lamb going to the slaughter so that those who stood for what he stood for would be galvanized in gaining a hearing from people. He did not even die so that someone else might live. When he went to the cross, he went to provide a way so that the very ones who crucified him, that's you and I, might have a way provided for our forgiveness and be rescued from the entanglements of the hell that we have created in this world. I want you to think very focusedly as you come to the closing moments of the book on what the cross of Jesus Christ means to you, or what it ought to mean to you. Even as I am closing these thoughts, a group of worshippers is nearby me, singing some hymns of the faith in memory of what our Lord did as he knelt in this garden on his way ultimately to the cross. This is the Garden of Gethsemane, the third garden. One of the most precious truths emerges here, my friend, the reality of forgiveness. Think about it. The reality of forgiveness. No matter what your life, what your past, whatever it is you or I try to cover up with the masks we wear in public, we know one who knows exactly who we are, and he is willing to say to you and to me, you are forgiven. My haunts go back to the land of India. One of the streets you're seeing here is a street where I was raised as a child. Here is a home in which I lived. All of these are reminders to me of the wonderful heritage, but at the same time, the confusion and the search of the soul. Take a look here. This is one land where the religion of Hinduism as honestly and sincerely searches for a way to atone. Huge implements on shoulders hooking into people's bodies as a means to atone or procure the answer to a prayer. Here, funeral pyres burning and the sacred river flowing at the sight of the sun in early dawn. All these smoke signs and all of the bathing that is going on. Very sincere people attempting to find purity, attempting to find contact with the living God. You will see this manifested in many ways. Let us be sure of one thing. For most of them, this is a very sincere and a heartfelt search, and ought not to be mocked. These are serious efforts. If Jesus were here talking to them, he would say to them, I paid the price for you. I've walked this road for you. I have made it possible for you. You don't have to immolate your body. You don't have to pay the price this way. I have paid it for you, and I am making it possible for you to be forgiven. You see, in Hinduism and Buddhism, every reincarnation you are paying. In Islam, you are never certain of your destiny. Inshallah, maybe the will of Allah. Isn't it wonderful to be certain? And that comes in the person of Christ. So we move from the text to the context, to the contest, and finally we come to the conquest and the culmination. This consummation, this conquest is what it is all about. May I read with you that closing moments of Jesus' encounter in that earthly pilgrimage of his with this wonderful disciple called Mary. Read along and follow along. Then the disciples went back to their homes, but Mary stood outside the tomb, crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, Woman, why are you crying? They have taken my Lord away, she said, and I don't know where they have put him. At this she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. Woman, he said, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for? Notice these words, please. Thinking he was the gardener, she said to him, Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. Then in verse 18, Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, I have seen the Lord. And she told them that he had said these things to her. Muhammad was laid in his death. There are passages of their scripture that talk about the way he died and so on. There are passages that question whether some of the deities espoused by pantheistic worldviews even existed. Buddha never talked about God. He had nothing to say about God. It is a non-theistic, if not atheistic religion. Here is more than a gardener. Here is more than one who talks about compassion and life and morality. Here is the Lord who rose again from the dead and gives to you and to me eternal life. This is no mere gardener. And so as we look for Jesus among other gods, we are looking for one who fashioned this world. We are looking for one who tells us how to live. We are looking for one who went to the cross to procure our forgiveness. We are looking for one who rose again from the dead. That is the Lord Jesus Christ. There is none like him, and he offers eternal life to you. Study it till you understand this so well that the Lord of glory truly inspires everything you think of and do. Thanks for staying with me through this study. May God bless you.